Christian parenting.
Do your kids have too many privileges or too many responsibilities? Join us as we talk about that today on Family Vision.
Hi, my name is Amy Rienow. Welcome to Family Vision with my parents, Dr. Rob and Amy Rienow, strengthening families through practical, encouraging, and real conversations.
Hi, Rob Rienow here with Visionary Family Ministries alongside my bride, Amy.
Hello.
Before we jump into this conversation about privileges and responsibilities, Christmas is coming sooner than we think. And I want to tell you about a new Advent devotional from our partners at Christian Parenting. It's called Read, Ask, Go. It's an interactive Advent devotional for the whole family. Takes you from December 1st to December 25th. The scriptures, activities, challenges in the book are going to help your whole family prepare your hearts for Christmas. And you can check this out at cpadvent.org. That's CP for Christian Parenting, cpadvent.org. All right, Amy Jean, let's talk about this important subject of the balance of privileges and responsibilities in our home.
Yes, it's both an important subject and I also think a really hard one because it's something that A, we don't talk about very much, and B, when we start talking about these things, it can kind of awaken us to how it's really hard to live counterculturally because what we're going to talk about today, we're going to see how the typical culture around us is going to be kind of coming at the opposite of the things that we're trying to teach in our home, and that's difficult. But I want to start this topic with just presenting a really helpful illustration that's guided me in my parenting from the beginning. It was a famous sociology experiment, and I learned about it when I was getting my degree in counseling. But in this experiment, they just examined playgrounds where kids were playing, and they noticed that any playground that had a fence around it, that the children, they felt free to roam throughout that whole space, that they would play, they would make use of all of the area up to that fence. But if they went to playgrounds where there wasn't a fence, that there was almost less freedom, that the kids would be clumped together, they wouldn't be using as much of the space of an open field, even if there was a great field around it. It was something about that fence that gave them the security to move and advance into the whole play area. And that illustration, and maybe it's just because I'm a very visual person, has always helped me with parenting because I've thought of parenting as being this long task of constantly trying to figure out where to put my fence around for each child and how do I grow their fence in such a way that they are maximizing their freedoms and being able to do all, explore their gifts, all these different things, right, that God gives our kids. But how do I create these safe boundaries for them? And specifically today, we're going to apply that picture to this idea of adult responsibilities and adult privileges. So how do we help our kids grow in adult responsibility in such a way that they're increasing in adult responsibility before they get to experience adult privileges? So let me just give you a really practical example of that. So my 8-year-old Rush is not allowed to play video games whenever he wants to.
To his great dismay.
To his great dismay. Do you remember the famous Rush line when we were in Chicago and he was 4 years old and we were entertaining a family, our friends who were from India, missionaries, and all of a sudden Rush said from the back, he goes, well, the only thing I'm addicted to is video games, just out of nowhere. And I think PC was like, well...
It's a shining moment for us.
Yeah, and PC said, well, it's good. They say that, getting over denial is one of the first tools of recovery. So obviously video games have always been very present in that boy's life. But again, as an 8-year-old, he doesn't have the privilege of just playing video games whenever he wants to. He always has to ask me. We set timers. I have a lot of boundaries around when he can play video games. But in contrast, his older brother, JD, who's in high school, and he's 16 years old, and he's balancing school responsibilities and...
He's in college now.
Yeah, he's in college now. But when he was 16 at home, he's balancing school, he's balancing sports, he's balancing lots of different responsibilities. He's doing it well. He's no longer asking me if he can play video games. He's earned that privilege to manage that on his own time. So I just kind of give us a practical example. Why don't you?
Well, it reminds me of a scripture from Colossians chapter 3, verse 21. For dads, it says, "Fathers, don't provoke your children to anger, or else they'll become discouraged." Mm-hmm. And I think one of the ways that we can discourage our kids is by expecting, especially as they grow through their tween and teen years, giving them more and more responsibilities, but not giving them the corresponding privileges that go along with it. Or another way, and we deal with this in our counseling ministry a lot, we'll have a 16 or 17-year-old who's very upset with mom and dad because they're not allowed to get their license. Well, why can't I get my license? And mom and dad say some general thing, well, when we think you're ready, we'll let you get your license. Well, that's incredibly exasperating for the teenager, the when we think you're ready, instead of getting concrete things. Well, you don't come home on time the way you need to, or you're not staying on top of your schoolwork the way you need to, when your grades get to such and such, so that there's like a concrete thing that the son or daughter can say, all right, I need to do better with these adult responsibilities, and then I'm going to get more of those adult privileges.
Right. We definitely see that, and there's kind of pockets of communities we've talked about before that we often see in more homeschool families where we see this kind of thing that you're talking about, where often kids become pretty frustrated that they're really growing in adult responsibilities and they're not seeing their adult privileges increase at all, and that's a situation that can be very patronizing for a
they lose heart.
Yeah, they lose heart. But generally, you would agree that in our culture, I think you would agree that it's more way out of balance the other way. That generally what we see in culture is that more and more kids these days expect and have a lot of adult privileges without very many adult responsibilities, and it's almost completely opposite of what we see in maybe some other smaller pockets of our culture.
For sure.
So I like to give the example of this with this kind of glaring example. You probably won't remember this, but we have
we'll see. With my memory, I mean, it's strong,
I don't think you
strong
will.
area
I don't
for me.
think you will. My Jessica and Hannah are our nieces, and they were.
I remember them.
You do? Well, good. I'm glad you remember them. But, we had little ones. They're much older. They are teenagers at this point, and we are new parents with our little kids, and we'd go visit. And they're teenagers, and they like to watch these reality TV shows that I watch with them. And there was a show that they like to watch. It was called Sweet 16. And it was this reality show about, these 16-year-old girls and how elaborate and wonderful their Sweet 16 party was.
Yeah, I don't remember this story.
Yeah, I don't think you'd remember it. So I'm watching the show with them. Never seen it before, and I'm just kind of taking it all in. This 16-year-old has had the world showered upon her. And many times throughout the show, she's starting to cry and break down because this is all just too much. And she's snapping at her mother, and her mother's backing off and, oh, I understand this is really stressful. And she's just got all this makeup on, and she's just, this is just so hard. I mean, I didn't know it would be so hard. And I'm literally aghast. I'm like, really? And then it ends with her getting a Land Rover. So I'm watching the show. I'm like, okay, so the person with the emotional behavior of a 5-year-old is now driving around a Land Rover. This was very disturbing to me. I was trying to get the girls what's your feed? What do you think about this show? Or do you think that it's probably good for her to have, a great example of the kids watching this show, you know what I mean? And seeing a whole lot of adult privileges thrown onto a person who really didn't display much maturity or responsibility. And so I think it's very common, and we saw this when we were working in youth ministry, that this sort of lopsidedness where kids are expecting privacy and phones and freedom and all of these things that are very much adult privileges, yet they don't necessarily have much expected on them or growing in adult responsibilities, which is almost leading to a fake adulting to some extent. And I don't know if you remember, but
I'm sure I do.
I'm sorry. I keep saying this. It's kind of...
I don't know why you keep saying that.
I don't know. I'm sorry. But do you remember that I talked about, for a long time, I was in this phase where, there's all these books about raise your children to be heroes or raise your children to be these great athletes. And I said, I just think we need to write a book, Raise Your Children to be Adults. Just the most basic. Let's just start
Someone
there.
beat you to it, right?
And I think someone actually wrote, I'm still kind of bummed about that. It's a classic idea that I should have taken action. I don't know, I guess.
Good. It's not too late for the lawyers to get involved. You just tell them, I thought of that.
I'll try that. So
I liked what you said before about different sets of parents are going to come from different perspectives on this. Like there's a spectrum. We talked about the parent that is expecting all these responsibilities from their kids but not giving them much privilege. And like you said, I really think that's the minority parent out there. I personally, as you will attest, resonate with the other side. I err too much on giving my kids too much privilege, saying yes too much, and maybe not holding their feet to the fire on getting their things done. And so even just some basic parenting principles here of teaching our kids and expecting our kids, hey, we need to get our work done first, and then we can go see our friends, or then we can go play outside, or then we can play those video games. Or even the principle of if your kids have a whole series of things to do, encouraging them, asking them, what's the hardest thing on your list? What's the thing you really don't want to do? Well, that's the first thing you should do. Like tackle the hardest job first to start helping them flex those responsibility muscles, because that's what adults have to do. Adults have to do a whole bunch of things in a day that we'd not particularly want to do.
And I think just getting back to why is it dangerous to give our kids too much adult privileges without corresponding adult responsibility is, number one, it really doesn't prepare them for adulthood. If I go back to that visual illustration I started with, freedom without fences is not freedom at all. We all have to develop, our lines and our boundaries and understand that, growing into adulthood is really accepting and internalizing your own boundaries and your own responsibilities and understanding that leads to a more happy life. And I think that this high adult privilege without much responsibility and really gives into, in many ways, a sense of entitlement and a sense of narcissism. And if your kids grow into more and more entitlement and narcissism, it leads to a lot of unhappiness, not happiness.
Can you go back and talk about, you just threw this out there before, this issue of privacy and how that connects with inappropriate level of thinking of privilege?
Yeah. Well, let me preface that first. Again, with going back to my days and getting my degree in counseling, because I can remember sitting in those classes and one conversation that I had, I think it was in an ethics class, where they were talking about this idea of a teenager having a diary, having all these things read and talking about whether it was right for a parent to read the teenager's diary. Now, well, I'm in my 20s. I don't have kids yet. I think in my first year of marriage, I'm taking this all in. But there's a part of me thinking, somewhere deep inside, I kind of think that that's okay. You know what I mean? I really, and this was a big ethics discussion of, should a parent have the right to read their teenager's diary? Well, now that I am a parent and have been for some time, 100%.
Yeah, that's become pretty clear.
100%, yes, they have that right. In the sense that I've started this conversation actually with my kids, they're very little, with the idea that when will you have complete freedom to do whatever you want to do? Well, when you pay for your own life. I think I was having that conversation with Lissy when she was about 7 years old, because we were constantly in a battle about whatever it was that she wanted to wear this. And I said, no, she couldn't wear this. Well, when am I going to be able to wear this? And I would say, well, Lissy, when you pay for your own life, you're going to be able to wear whatever you want. She's like, what does it mean to pay for my own life? Well, it means that you pay for the food that you're wearing, the house that you're living in, and just kind of just laying the groundwork that as long as we are your parents and you're under our authority, we have something to say about these things. And the more that you show us, you're growing in maturity and responsibility, the more you get these freedoms given to you. But specifically, this right to privacy, you've got in the world of social media, a lot of parents out there that feel, they're not even on their kids' accounts. You know what I mean? They're not friended or they can't see these things. And I just would encourage you that, again, this is countercultural. Yeah. And that's what makes this hard.
Any social media account your kid has, you need the usernames, you need the passwords. We have some resources on our website that get into parenting in this world of tech. But absolutely. And, but you say, well, my kid's a pretty good kid. And so here's the way I would ask that. Yeah, how many of us as adults would look back at our teen years and say, yeah, I was a pretty good kid. No, not perfect, but I was a pretty good kid. A lot of adults say that. And how many adults who would say they were pretty good kids when they were teenagers had some things going on in their life that weren't so good, weren't so holy, that they were really keeping secret from their parents? Answer, 100%. So, I mean, sin and struggles always want to be hidden, always want to stay hidden. So the idea that you may think, but gosh, my teenagers are a really good kid. I'm sure they are. I'm really happy for you. And I'm sure they have some secret struggles. So part of our job as parents is building this heart-connected relationship with our kids and pressing into those areas where they naturally are going to want to keep things they're struggling with in secret. One funny example on responsibility, and then I know you want to wrap up our episode here, honey. But quick funny story on chores. A father told the two boys that they were responsible to go out in the backyard and take care of all the dog poop. And the older brother said to the younger brother, trying to be a good leader in this situation, to say, okay, let's do 50-50 on the job. I will find the poop and you pick it up. That was his solution to the 50-50 responsibility.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah.
That sounds like something my older brother would have pulled on me and I would have believed it and done it. So, but anyway, just going on to this idea again that having your kids reach a certain level of responsibility and maturity before they get privileges, I keep saying this is countercultural. And when you're trying to do this in your own home, it's hard. So I just want to say that very clearly, that you get pushback a lot because your kids are constantly in a world where they're going to see a lot of kids that have more freedom. They have more privileges. They don't have their parents checking up on these things. And you're going to be like, well, why do you have to check up on these things? Because everybody else gets this freedom. And I just want to encourage you that don't give in here. Like, really work at this. And what you said earlier, as far as laying things out clearly for kids, I know that I've always liked to just stress the top three of, disobedience, disrespect, and irresponsibility are big issues. So my kids are continually disobeying me. They're not going to be increasing in any freedoms. If they're continually disrespecting me, they're not getting more adult freedoms or privileges. And if they're consistently irresponsible, that will also reduce adult freedoms. These top three are very, very central and kind of help you kind of figure out, okay, what do I need to hold the line in here before I allow my kids this next level of privilege? And some of you might be listening to this think, oh, we need to pull privilege back, and you should feel free to do that as a parent, but just expect that it's going to be extremely challenging. And back on that privacy issue, one thing that's very interesting in our home, our kids know that we have access to all of their texts, for example. They know that we have a couple devices where we can see everything that they are texting their friends. Now, that doesn't mean that we're reading through them all the time. We aren't.
Make a full-time job.
Right. But it is interesting that even just that awareness that it's there, I think gives them this other sense of just knowing again that someday when they're out of our home completely and pay for their own life, they will have this complete freedom without any oversight. But right now, because we pay for those devices, we don't think you have this right to privacy, not in the Rienow home, because we just feel like it's important to help keep accountability, and especially in this world of social media. So we're going to wrap this up. Another session coming up about 12-year challenges is going to help us even with more practical steps. But remember, freedom without fences is not freedom at all. And helping our kids develop these responsibilities are helping them develop their own fences for adulthood, which is going to give them a happier adulthood.
Right. We hope these conversations help you. These are the conversations we're having in our home as we're wrestling and struggling through our own parenting journey. And that's what we come and talk with you about here on Family Vision, letting you into our world, some of the scriptures that God's using to help us, the principles that we're trying to put in place. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So if Family Vision's an encouragement to you, please share it with someone else. Please share it with your neighbor, with your church family. If you haven't already done so, go into whatever platform you use to listen to the podcast give us a review, leave your notes there. The reason for that is not to tell us, Rob and Amy, that you really like it. But the more you interact with the podcast and the more you review it well, then that podcast platform sends it out more, makes it more visible. It just lets us reach more people with these scriptures and this Christian vision for family life. And that is what our mission here at Family Vision is all about. As always, we'd love to hear from you. Podcast@visionaryfam.com, podcast@visionaryfam.com. And we're excited to spend time with you on our next episode of Family Vision.